Thanks for joining us for CBN News Today. I'm Charlene Aaron. The war between Israel and Hamas resumed today after the latest ceasefire collapsed. Fighting broke out in southern Gaza just hours after the agreement went into effect. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed to keep up the fight until Hamas terror tunnels are destroyed. As Chris Mitchell also reports, the UN and the U.S. both criticized Israel for an attack earlier this week at a UN facility.
The White House called the attack at the UN school unacceptable and indefensible.
Nearly 20 people died during the attack, but Israeli ambassador to the U.S. Ron Dermer told CBN News the incident demonstrates how Hamas places its military infrastructure within civilian areas and continues to use Palestinians as human shields.
They are forcing Israel, in order to defend ourselves, to attack those areas. They want us to kill Palestinian civilians because what they hope to do is to take those horrible pictures that would move any decent person. When you see children who are killed, when you see civilians who are killed, even in the most cautious war that can happen, and certainly in a case when you have an enemy that acts as Hamas does. What Hamas wants those pictures to do is they want it to lead to international outrage and pressure on Israel.
Dermer says when the world sees those pictures, the world needs to pressure the real culprit, Hamas.
And the question is, are we going to break this cycle of human shields? Are we going to finally have the pictures and pressure, the pictures lead to pressure on Hamas? If pictures lead to pressure on Hamas, the chances of them doing this over and over again go down. If they lead to Israel, you are actually not only endangering Israeli civilians, you are endangering primarily Palestinian civilians because they'll continue to use their own people as human shields. It's sick, it's grotesque, and it's got to stop.
During the conflict, Hamas rockets were found in 3 UN schools.
As a journalist who covers Gaza and UNRWA, I was not at all surprised that rockets were found in the UNRWA schools.
David Bedeen wrote, "Roadblock to Peace, How the UN Perpetuates the Arab-Israeli Conflict," and says UNRWA is actually hosting Hamas.
Our agency warned the United States government, the Canadian government, the European Union, and those are the prime supporters of UNRWA, that there was military training, military and weapons in the camps, in all of these UNRWA camps in Gaza. Our agency was ignored despite the facts.
Dermer says lawmakers on Capitol Hill are beginning to ask questions.
How did they allow their schools to be used as weapons depots? I mean, these are very, very serious issues that can corrupt the entire UN system, that are supposed to be there to protect civilians, are supposed to be there to help the innocent, not to allow their shelters to be used as basically military infrastructure for Hamas. It's just unacceptable, and more people are asking questions. We'll have to see what happens.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
The Christian woman sentenced to death in Sudan for refusing to renounce her faith is now safely home in the United States. Miriam Ibrahim and her family arrived in New Hampshire last night. They were met with singing and celebration. Take a listen. Miriam's life has been a whirlwind the last week. From escaping Sudan to meeting the Pope in Rome, she finally arrived in the U.S. where her husband Daniel is a citizen. She made the journey with Daniel and their 2 young children, one of whom she gave birth to while shackled in prison. Her first stop in the U.S. was a layover in Philadelphia, where she met privately with the mayor. He told CBN News about her well-being.
She is a tremendously strong woman. That her faith gives her, I would say, almost a certain aura about her. The ordeal that she and her family have been through to come to this city of faith, and I talked about William Penn and the founding of Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, a city founded on the tenets of religious freedom and tolerance and openness and the ability to practice your faith. Both of them smiled.
Ibrahim was sentenced to death but released after an international outcry for her freedom. The Sudanese government claims she abandoned Islam when she married her Christian husband. Miriam said she's always been a Christian. An Ebola outbreak in Africa is worsening. Now, U.S. health officials are warning Americans not to travel to the 3 hardest hit countries. And today, the U.S. prepares for the return of 2 American missionaries infected with the virus while serving in Liberia. Caitlin Burke reports.
It's the worst Ebola outbreak in history. The virus is now being blamed for more than 700 deaths in 4 West African countries, and it shows no signs of coming under control. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention on Thursday warned Americans to avoid non-essential travel to Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone.
Unfortunately, these countries don't have the infrastructure to handle the response, and moreover, they don't have any experience with these kind of outbreaks in the past.
American missionaries Nancy Ritball and Dr. Kent Brantley will return to the U.S. to be treated. They were serving on a joint team in Liberia with Samaritan's Purse and Christian Missions Organization, SIM. Ritball is in stable but serious condition and is receiving an experimental drug.
The Ebola virus, in terms of mortality rate, right now is at about 64%. And so that's good news for us. We feel like that's Mom has a chance.
Franklin Graham is the CEO of Samaritan's Purse. He gave an update on Dr. Brantley.
He's fighting for his life. It's a very difficult day for him, and we just ask everybody who's watching if they will pray.
Those who know Dr. Brantley say he put his life on the line for one reason.
This is a guy who thinks that people should do more than just give lip service when they say they're going to follow Jesus.
Meanwhile, Liberian Christians are gathering for a time they're calling sackcloth and ashes, asking God to halt the spread of Ebola in their country. 500 church leaders are coming together in the capital city of Monrovia for 3 days of fasting and prayer. Pastor Emery David of Triumphant Christian Church told us Christians are trusting God for a miracle.
Well, we want this Ebola lifted. If it is an error, a sin that we have committed, we want God to forgive the church, the government, the nation, and heal the land.
Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
And you can find out more about the Liberian Church's prayer and fasting campaign on Gary Lane's blog called The Global Lane. That's at cbnnews.com. The U.S. government says it's sending an additional $378 million in aid to people in war-torn Syria. Ongoing fighting has resulted in great suffering for those inside and outside the country. Some Syrians who fled the country for neighboring Lebanon are continuing to receive relief thanks to CBN. Partnering with American Christians and churches, CBN Disaster Relief paid to ship a container filled with much-needed items to Lebanon. CBN partner Bushbel Consultants worked with a church in Zaleh, Lebanon, to distribute clothing, bedding, vitamins, and pasta to Syrian refugees in the Bekaa Valley.
We have been very blessed to be able to partner with CBN. We are here to help the people in need, who are like us, who all of a sudden have lost everything and ran away with the clothing on their backs only. We have been very active and we are committed to continue.
The boxed items were given to Christian families at a church. Church Muslims received theirs at a nearby refugee camp. CBN has been helping Syrian refugees throughout the region for more than 2 years. An American Christian held in North Korea says he feels abandoned by the United States government. Kenneth Bay, a former tour guide, has been imprisoned in the communist country for nearly 2 years. In an interview with a pro-North Korea newspaper based in Japan, Bay said nothing seems to be happening in his case. He also said he's afraid of being sent back to a labor camp. Bay's sister says it's the first time they've heard of him since April, and she's called on the White House to do more to secure his release. Bay is one of 3 Americans held in North Korea. Back here in the U.S., the U.S. coal industry is preparing for more layoffs this fall. Alpha Natural Resources says it's expected to lay off 1,100 workers at 11 West Virginia surface coal mines by mid-October. The company says weak markets and federal regulation on carbon emissions are making it more difficult to operate. Some have accused President Obama of a war on coal. West Virginia's governor said the layoffs show the state's fears over the Obama administration's rules have come true. In the past 3 years, Alpha says it has laid off 4,000 employees and shut down 60 mines and 35 million tons of production. Coming up, can you be a Christian and a businessman at the same time? In Colorado, that answer is no. You won't believe what happens if you dare to stand your faith. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg is defending the Supreme Court's decision to strike down a 35-foot buffer zone outside Massachusetts abortion clinics. The liberal justice says the court's unanimous ruling in June balances the rights of clinic access with the free speech of abortion opponents. The Feminist Majority Foundation says the decision emboldens more violence, harassment, and intimidation of women in the name of free speech. But Ginsburg says the state's court case in defense of the law was weak. A controversy in Carthage, Missouri, where National Guard troops did not get permission to appear at a church's vacation Bible school. Bible Baptist Church wanted to honor members of the military as part of their annual VBS using the theme God's Rescue Squad. Local firefighters and sheriffs attended the patriotic services. Members of the National Guard were also invited, but they did not appear. The National Guard says they received the invitation too late. But it seems another factor also played a role. It's a federal policy that actually forbids the military from taking part in events sponsored by religious groups. CBN News spoke with the church's pastor about the issue.
It was sad. I think our kids were, disappointed. I read about this and I hear about this in big cities, New York City and things like that, Chicago. But Carthage, Missouri, we're right in the middle of the country. This is what everybody considers the Bible Belt. And then our military says, no, we can't do that because it looks like it's going to be an issue of separation of church and state.
A spokesman for the National Guard cites time constraints for the denial, not religious reasons. Would you do something that goes against your religious beliefs? What if the government ordered you to? And if you refuse, they tell you you're breaking the law. Well, that's what happened to the Christian owner of a bakery in Colorado who said he wouldn't make a cake for a same-sex marriage celebration. But as Mark Martin reports, his story isn't over yet.
The sign on the door reads, "Celebrating 20 years of great cakes." And during that time, Lakewood, Colorado's Masterpiece Cake Shop has created art in the form of baked goods to keep customers coming back.
And what do you want it to say?
From cookies and cupcakes to signature cakes. Check out the mountain landscape on this one. Jack Phillips and his daughter Lisa have transformed their bakery into a studio. All of it, Jack says, inspired and motivated by his faith in Jesus Christ.
The most important thing that I think about throughout the day when I wake up, when I go to work, I want to know that what I'm doing is pleasing to him, that I honor him and his word, because that's the most important thing.
Jack's Christian faith landed him in trouble with the law. His crime? Adhering to his biblical belief that marriage is between one man and one woman. In 2012, a homosexual couple sued Jack after he declined to make a cake to celebrate their marriage. An administrative law judge ruled against him, and the Colorado Civil Rights Commission agreed. The commission stated Jack's refusal went against the state's public accommodation law. It requires businesses to serve customers regardless of their sexual orientation. In a public statement, one member of the Civil Rights Commission said, "I can believe anything I want, but if I'm going to do business here, I'd ought to not discriminate against people."
I didn't discriminate against anybody. Like Nicole said, I've chosen not to make cakes for same-sex weddings. I told David and Charlie when they came in that I would sell them cookies and brownies and birthday cakes and shower cakes. I just don't do the same-sex wedding cake. So I did not discriminate against them, just that event that I've chosen not to participate in.
Jack's attorney, Nicole Martin, says the commission violated Jack's First Amendment rights, and she's taken the case to the Colorado Court of Appeals. The Civil Rights Commission's order requires Jack and his staff to make cakes for same-sex celebrations if asked. He must also re-educate his staff about Colorado's Anti-Discrimination Act. Under that law, artists must endorse all views. The order also requires him to put in place new policies to comply with the commission's order. In addition, he will submit quarterly compliance reports to the government for 2 years. According to Alliance Defending Freedom, the reports must include the number of customers declined a wedding cake or any other product and include why, so to ensure he has fully eliminated his religious beliefs from his business.
The government has chosen which message it favors in this case. I think the state has made it very clear. Jack's First Amendment rights, Jack's freedom to express himself, or more importantly, not express himself must bow to the complainant's message. And all I can say is what that looks like to me is something very frightening. And that's nothing more than diversity through conformity. And that's not diversity at all.
Jack Phillips' case is one of a handful in which complainants sued private businesses for refusing to accommodate gay couples getting married. It also helped lead to controversial proposals in several states, allowing businesses to decline service based on the religious beliefs of owners.
This case is not about, and it never has been about, the young men that came in here almost 2 years ago asking Jack to design and create their cake. This case has always been about the message that that cake expresses, what that cake communicates.
It's surprising. Yeah, this is not what they taught us in civics class. They could do this to you. They do this in other countries, not here.
So Jack stands on the First Amendment. In this case, we're going to learn whether the First Amendment has a future in America.
And in a country founded on freedom of religion and speech, that's a future important to all Americans. Mark Martin, CBN News, Lakewood, Colorado.
Up next, the Godfather of Soul, the tumultuous life of James Brown and how gospel music changed his life. Known as the Godfather of Soul, James Brown's work still influences the music industry more than 6 years after his death. A feature film about his life hits theaters today, and as Ephraim Graham shows us, the church played a big influence on his life and legacy.
James Brown's story is a real-life tale of rags to riches, with a few bumps on the journey.
He had to fend for himself, so he became a hustler.
Journalist Bill Carpenter listened to Brown as a child, covered him as an adult, and writes about him in his book, Uncloudy Days, the Gospel Music Encyclopedia.
He grew up in the Great Depression, born in 1933 in Barnwell, South Carolina. Poorer than poor were his own words. He said poor people looked down on him. He was so poor. And he came from a very dysfunctional family where his parents were not in the home. He was raised by his Aunt Honey, who sort of ran a boarding house.
At age 16, long before becoming the Godfather of Soul, James Brown went from Aunt Honey's boarding house to a Georgia jailhouse for armed robbery. It was there that his true love of music was actually born. It's a story he shared with CBN's Scott Ross more than 30 years ago.
They turned me loose to sing gospel one morning, and we went out and took about 5 prisoners with us to sing gospel, and the warden realized that he turned all of us loose. And we got there, everybody was crying because we had them singing. Oh, our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name.
While he was in prison, he met someone named Bobby Bird, who went on to become a very integral part of his band. And Bobby's family was, deeply in the church. And when he came out of prison, he and Bobby started a gospel group called the Starlighters.
The Starlighters eventually became James Brown and the Famous Flames.
God made your ears. You didn't make them. You gonna argue with God's ears? If it sound good and it feel good, then it's musical.
Their meteoric rise in the music industry is masterfully told in the feature film Get On Up.
Like the title say, Papa's got a brand new bag.
Chadwick Boseman, who played Jackie Robinson in 42, leads the all-star cast.
Our music is still affected by, what he started because it was such an innovation.
Much of that innovation came from Brown's childhood, growing up in church.
At one point when he was a kid, he thought he wanted to be a preacher because he really enjoyed watching how they stirred the audience.
Brown writes about one preacher in particular in his autobiography, The Godfather of Soul, a flamboyant evangelist known as Sweet Daddy Grace. Grace started the denomination, the United House of Prayer for All People.
And he sat in this big red throne, and he had a cape and a crown. And James Brown just looked at it in amazement. And that is where he got that sense of pageantry
that was in his the 1960s shows when he was wearing the cape. And when you look at those performances like Please, 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 it's like a revival service.
Brown's revival-like performances come back to life on the big screen and on New York's famous Apollo stage in Get On Up. Rock music royalty Mick Jagger is one of the film's producers.
The fact that someone like Mick Jagger has produced a film about James Brown, and then he talks about the things he liked about James Brown, all those things are things from the church. And that's the influence that sometimes we forget that these things came from church.
Ephraim Graham, CBN News.
And you'll be able to see Scott Ross's entire interview with James Brown on the 700 Club on Monday, August 4th. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Finally today, some find it convenient, others say it's controversial. This year, Disney World added new microchip technology to the Magic Kingdom. The theme park rolled out its My Magic Plus program. It uses RFID chip wristbands for all-in-one access to the park and attractions. The bands are used for tickets, Disney hotel room keys, Fast Pass, and more, especially targeted at pass holders and guests staying at a park resort. RFID technology may offer a lot of convenience, but some are also concerned about the possible dark side. Our reporter Mark Martin investigated to see if RFID is opening doors for Mark of the Beast. You can weigh in on that story about RFID and end times prophecy at cbnnews.com. That's going to do it for now on CBN News Today. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com. Tell us what you think about the stories you've seen here. You can do that on Facebook or at CBN News on Twitter. We hope you'll join us next time. Have a great day. God bless.